Welcome to another interesting story. If you haven't subscribed, please make sure to do so and turn on the notification bell so that you will always be updated. Now, let's get into our story. Watch and enjoy. The house didn't feel like a home. It looked perfect from the outside. Wide glass windows catching the afternoon sun, white stone walls glowing under carefully placed lighting. Every corner polished to a shine that suggested control, not comfort. Inside, everything was just as bright. Too bright. The kind of brightness that exposed everything except the truth. Virginia Scott sat at the edge of cream-colored sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her posture was perfect. Her breathing was not. Across from her, her Aunt Suzette stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silhouette sharp against the sunlight pouring in. She wasn't looking at Virginia. She didn't need to. Her voice carried authority without effort. It's already been decided. Virginia's fingers tightened slightly, nails pressing into her skin. Decided. Like her life was a business deal. You didn't even ask me, Virginia said, her voice controlled, but thin at the edges. Suzette turned slowly, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Even that sound felt intentional. Measured. I didn't need to, she replied. You don't understand the kind of opportunity this is. Opportunity. Virginia almost laughed, but nothing about this was funny. Opportunity for who? She asked quietly. Suzette's expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened. For you, she said. For this family. Do you think everything you have just came out of nowhere? Virginia's gaze dropped for a moment, not in submission, but in restraint, because she knew exactly what Suzette meant. The house, the lifestyle, the quiet luxury. It had always come with a cost. She just didn't know. She was the final payment. He chose you, Suzette continued, stepping closer now, her presence filling the room. Out of everyone. That should tell you something. It did. It told her everything she didn't want to hear. Virginia swallowed slowly. I don't even know him. Suzette exhaled, as if patience was something she was rapidly losing. You know enough, she said. Marcus Reed is one of the most powerful men in this city. The name landed heavy. Marcus Reed. Virginia had heard it before. Everyone had. Wealth, influence, power that moved quietly but decisively. And yet, that wasn't what unsettled her. What does he want with me? Virginia asked. There it was. The question that had been sitting beneath everything. Suzette didn't answer immediately, and that silence said more than anything else could have. Virginia's chest tightened. He wants a wife, Suzette said finally. Simple, clean, terrifying. Virginia stood up slowly, her movements careful, like the ground beneath her had suddenly become unstable. A wife, she repeated. Suzette nodded once. Yes, and you're going to be exactly that. The finality in her tone left no room for negotiation. Virginia took a step back, then another. Her mind was racing now, thoughts colliding into each other, none of them forming a way out. This isn't normal, she said, her voice rising slightly. You can't just arrange something like this. Suzette's expression sharpened. Normal, she echoed. Nothing about our lives has ever been normal, Virginia. Don't pretend this is where you suddenly draw the line. That hit harder than Virginia expected, because it was true, but that didn't make it right. I'm not marrying someone I don't love, Virginia said, more firmly now. Suzette smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Love, she repeated softly. Love doesn't secure your future. Love doesn't protect you. Love doesn't build empires. Her voice lowered slightly. But this does. Virginia felt the walls closing in. Not physically, emotionally. Every exit, every option, disappearing one by one. You don't understand what you're walking away from, Suzette added. No, Virginia said quietly. I understand exactly what I'm walking into. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Suzette reached for a tablet resting on the nearby table and turned it toward her. An image filled the screen. Marcus Reed. Sharp suit. Controlled expression. Eyes that didn't look like they missed anything. He looked calm. Too calm. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Virginia stared at the image longer than she meant to. There was something about him that felt distant, untouchable. and that scared her more than anything. "This is your future," Suzette said. Virginia shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered, but her voice didn't carry conviction anymore, because something had shifted. Not outside, inside, the realization. This wasn't a conversation. It was an order, and the wedding, it was already happening. "The ceremony is in 3 days," Suzette added, as if confirming it. 3 days. Virginia's breath caught. That wasn't time. That was a countdown. "You'll meet him tomorrow," Suzette continued. "Everything has been arranged. All you have to do is cooperate." Cooperate. Virginia's heart pounded louder now. Not from fear alone, from something else. Something sharper. Something awakening. Because in that moment, one truth became painfully clear. If she went through with this, there would be no coming back. No escape. No second chance. Just a life decided for her. A life controlled. A life owned. Virginia looked back at the image of Marcus Reed one last time. Then slowly, she looked away. Her mind wasn't frozen anymore. It was moving. Fast. Searching. Calculating. Because if this was a trap, then she needed to become something else entirely to get out of it. Something no one would expect. Something no one would question. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. Her breathing steadied. And for the first time since the conversation started, Virginia wasn't thinking about the wedding. She was thinking about escape. Because she didn't need a miracle. She needed a way out. The morning light poured through the glass windows like liquid gold. Soft. Clean. Unforgiving in its clarity. Virginia Scott stood still in the center of the upscale temporary apartment, her hands lightly gripping the back of a white leather chair. Everything around her looked too perfect for the kind of fear she was carrying inside. Too bright to hide in, too open to breathe in safely. Behind her, the city moved with effortless luxury, horns distant, traffic smooth, life continuing as if she hadn't just escaped a marriage that would have erased her entire future. But Virginia wasn't thinking about what she escaped. She was thinking about what came next. Because escape without strategy was just delay, and delay meant capture. She slowly turned her head toward the floor-to-ceiling window, not really seeing the skyline, but studying it like it held answers. That's when the thought came. Sharp. Dangerous. Uninvited. What if I couldn't see? Her breath slowed. Not fear this time. Calculation. She had noticed something the night before while hiding in plain sight. People didn't question blindness. They adjusted to it. They softened around it. They revealed more than they intended to. And most importantly, they stopped looking too closely. Virginia exhaled slowly and walked toward the mirror on the far wall. Her reflection stared back at her. Sharp eyes, focused, alert. Too aware. Too alive. That wouldn't work anymore. She stepped closer, then deliberately softened her gaze. Let her eyes lose their target. Not fully closed. Not exaggerated. Just unfocused. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening instead of seeing. A small shift, but it changed everything. In the mirror, she didn't look like Virginia Scott anymore. She looked like someone waiting for the world to guide her. Someone invisible in plain sight. A quiet knock came at the memory of her past self, trying to survive the marriage arrangement. Controlled dinners. Forced conversations. I was always watching her. She remembered how people treated blind individuals in passing. Careful voices. Slower movements. Lower expectations. And less scrutiny. Less danger. Her fingers slowly moved across the chair again, this time more intentional. Testing. Learning. Adapting. She walked forward. One step, then another. But she didn't lift her foot the way she normally would. Instead, she hesitated just slightly before each movement. As if she was calculating space she couldn't see. Her hand hovered near imaginary obstacles. She mapped the room without her eyes. Not because she needed to, but because she needed to become it. A sound from the hallway made her pause. She turned her head too quickly. Wrong. Too precise. She caught herself immediately and corrected it. Slower this time, softer, uncertain. Perfect. Her heartbeat increased, but her face stayed calm. This was not acting. This was survival engineering. Later that day, she left the apartment. The city outside was glowing under midday sun, glass buildings reflecting light in every direction, streets polished with movement and wealth. She entered a high-end public space, a luxury shopping atrium where silence wasn't allowed to exist. Everything here was designed to be seen, which made it the perfect place to learn how not to be. She observed carefully a visually impaired woman at the cafe counter. The way staff leaned in slightly, spoke slower, gestured more gently. A man guided by a subtle hand on his elbow. No rush, no pressure, no expectation of sharp response. Virginia watched everything, stored it, replayed it. Then she tried it herself. She lowered her gaze, not fully blind, but intentionally disconnected. Her steps slowed. Her shoulders softened. When a passerby nearly bumped into her, she didn't react immediately. She paused, just a fraction longer than normal, then shifted slightly aside, as if she had felt the movement instead of seen it. It worked. The man apologized gently without even looking too closely at her face. She nodded slowly. Too slow, but believable. Her pulse tightened, not from fear now, from realization. It was possible. She could become invisible in a world that only respected what it could see clearly. But invisibility came with a cost. Discipline, control, precision. One mistake, and everything collapsed. Back in the apartment that evening, she practiced again, this time in silence. She placed objects around the room, carefully, intentionally, then walked through them with altered perception, not guessing, adapting. Her hands moved like sensors, her steps like calculations, her breathing steady. At one point, she stopped in the center of the room and whispered to herself, barely audible, "If I can't convince the world, I cannot see." She paused. The weight of it settled fully now. It wasn't just disguise. It was identity replacement, a permanent mask, a life lived one layer removed from truth. Her reflection caught her again in the glass wall. Different now. Not Virginia Scott anymore. Something new was forming. Something dangerous. Something that could survive. She slowly adjusted her posture again, refining the illusion, softening every edge, removing every trace of certainty. Because certainty was dangerous. Certainty made people look closer, and she could not afford that. Not anymore. She took a slow step back, then another. Her eyes remained unfocused, her movements deliberately imperfect. She was no longer practicing. She was becoming. A final glance at the mirror confirmed it. The girl staring back wasn't fully real yet, but she was close enough to fool the world. Virginia turned away, her voice barely a breath in the empty room. "If I make one mistake." She paused. The silence answered for her. It would all be over. Everything broke open. The morning arrived too beautifully for what it was about to destroy. Sunlight spilled across the city in wide, golden sheets, reflecting off glass towers and polished cars like nothing in the world was wrong. But inside the private bridal suite of the estate, Virginia Scott stood still as marble, surrounded by silence, surrounded by luxury, surrounded by a future she refused to step into. Her reflection stared back at her in the tall mirror. Elegant white dress, flawless makeup, perfectly arranged hair. A bride built for obedience. A bride built to disappear. But today, Virginia wasn't disappearing into marriage. She was disappearing from it entirely. Behind her, voices moved through the mansion like distant waves. Staff preparing. Security adjusting positions. Family members laughing too loudly, pretending this was celebration instead of transaction. Everything was scheduled. Everything was controlled. Everything expected her to comply. Virginia slowly lowered her gaze, letting her eyes lose focus. Not because she needed to, but because she had to become what they believed she already was. She adjusted her breathing, slow, uneven, carefully designed. Then she reached for the edge of the table beside her and let her fingers hesitate just slightly before touching it. A small detail, a dangerous detail, but necessary. She had studied this moment for days. Every movement had been rehearsed, every reaction planned, but nothing could fully prepare her for the weight of actually doing it. A knock came at the door. "Miss Virginia, it's time." Her heart tightened. Time. That word no longer meant hours or minutes. It meant escape or capture. She turned her head slowly toward the voice, not meeting it, not acknowledging it directly. Then she answered in a calm, distant tone. "I'm ready." The door opened. Footsteps entered. Two attendants guided her gently, one on each side. Careful hands. Soft instructions. Everything aligned with the illusion. She allowed it. Every step she took through the hallway was deliberate, measured, uncertain, just enough to be believable. The mansion was alive with movement. Guests arriving. Voices rising. Music faintly beginning in the distance. A world celebrating a union she had already rejected in silence. At the grand staircase, she paused. Not because she was afraid, because she needed the timing. Below, the main hall was filled with people. Security positioned at every exit. Her future husband's family watching everything like ownership already transferred. She lowered her head slightly, let her hands tighten, just a fraction. Then she shifted her weight, carefully, almost imperceptibly, and misstepped, not dramatically, not noticeably, just enough to force the attendants to react. One reached for her arm immediately. "Careful, ma'am." Exactly as planned. She allowed the correction, let her body lean slightly into their guidance. Trusting, dependent, unaware, they resumed, guiding her forward, down the stairs, through the center of the celebration. Every eye briefly touched her. None questioned her, because no one questions what they think they understand. At the bottom of the staircase, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A delayed delivery van had blocked part of the driveway. Security moved. Attention shifted. For 3 seconds, the system loosened. Virginia felt it before she saw it. Opportunity. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat sharpened. She tilted her head slightly as if confused, then gently placed her hand against the railing. "I need air," she murmured softly. The attendants hesitated. Just enough. Then one nodded. "We'll take you to the side garden." The side corridor was quieter, lined with tall glass windows that opened into a sunlit garden overflowing with white roses and trimmed hedges. Beautiful, open, unwatched, almost. A single guard stood near the exit gate. Virginia adjusted her posture again, softened further, slowed further. She approached the garden door and paused just before stepping outside. Then she did something calculated. She reached slightly forward, too far. Her hand brushed air where a wall should have been. The guard noticed, immediately stepped closer. "Ma'am, this way." He guided her forward. 1 step, 2, exactly where she needed him. Because now he was close enough, and focused enough, and blind to what mattered. A distant shout came from inside the mansion. Someone calling her name. The wedding was beginning to realize something was off. The moment fractured. Virginia didn't wait. She acted. Not fast, not obvious, just precise. She let her body stumble slightly forward, forcing the guard to instinctively catch her. That split-second contact broke his position. She slipped sideways, not running, not panicking, gliding through the gap like she belonged nowhere but escape. The garden air hit her first, warm, bright, alive. She didn't look back immediately. That would have ruined everything. Instead, she walked, fast, controlled, blind act still intact, until she reached the outer hedge line. Only then did she move. She pushed through a narrow maintenance gate she had memorized from observation days earlier. It opened into a service alley behind the estate. Quiet, hidden, unwatched. For the first time that morning, she breathed fully. But freedom didn't feel like relief. It felt like exposure, because now she was outside the system, without protection, without identity, without safety. Behind her, alarms began to rise faintly from the estate. Voices calling out, footsteps multiplying, discovery spreading. She walked faster now, then broke into a controlled run, still careful, still disciplined, still pretending, until she turned a corner and the mansion disappeared completely from view. Only then did she stop. Her hand rested against a wall, steadying herself, her breathing uneven but controlled. She finally lifted her head slightly, not to see clearly, but to confirm distance, to confirm separation, to confirm survival. But the city ahead was massive, unfamiliar, endless, and she had no destination, only escape. Virginia exhaled slowly. The weight of everything she had just done pressed against her chest. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. A life was gone. Another had not yet formed. And somewhere behind her, the world she had left was already starting to search. She whispered into the open air, almost silently, "I can't go back." Her fingers tightened slightly at her side. The streets ahead blurred into possibility and danger all at once. And she stepped forward, not knowing where she was going, only that she couldn't go back. Hope you are following up and enjoying the story. If you still haven't subscribed, what are you still waiting for? Just hit that subscription button, like, share, and comment. Virginia Scott, the man who noticed everything. The city felt different after escape. Not safer, just louder. Every sound pressed against Virginia Scott like it had meaning now. Like the world had started paying attention in a way it never had before. She moved carefully through the sunlit streets, keeping her posture soft, her steps slightly uneven, her gaze unfocused. The blind act wasn't something she was doing anymore. It was something she was becoming. A polished glass intersection opened ahead, surrounded by luxury towers that reflected the afternoon light like mirrors of control. Cars glided past in silence near a private entrance. Virginia slowed instinctively. Something shifted in the air. Not sound, not movement. Attention. A black car pulled in with quiet precision. No noise, no disruption, just authority arriving in motion. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. Adrien Voss. He didn't rush. He didn't look around like most powerful men did when they wanted to be seen. He simply arrived, and the space adjusted to him. Tall, controlled, immaculately dressed in a dark suit that carried weight without effort. Nothing about him was loud. Everything about him was certain. Virginia slowed without meaning to. Not recognition. Instinct. He stepped forward once, then stopped. His eyes lifted and locked onto her. Virginia continued walking. Careful, measured. Her movements stayed consistent. Hands slightly uncertain, steps lightly delayed, posture softened into dependence. Everything aligned with the identity she had built. She passed closer to the building entrance where he was headed. Security stood in place, alert but still. Virginia subtly shifted her path, as if unsure of direction. A controlled hesitation. A practiced imperfection. Almost past. Almost free. Then, stop. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut clean through everything. Virginia froze internally, but her body stayed composed. She tilted her head slightly, blind expression intact. "Yes?" she asked softly. A guard moved forward instinctively, but Adrien lifted one hand. The guard stopped immediately. Now it was only them. Adrien stepped closer. Slow, calculated, observing space like it was part of him. "You're lost," he said. Not a question, a conclusion. Virginia tilted her head slightly. "I think I am." Adrien studied her face. Longer than necessary. Then, "You crossed into restricted access. Blind visitors don't enter this building without clearance." A pause. "You don't have it." Virginia lowered her gaze slightly. "I didn't mean to come here," she said. "I was looking for help. A simple story, carefully constructed." But Adrien didn't respond. Instead, he circled her once. Not threatening, measuring. Virginia stayed still. Every instinct told her to adjust, to overcorrect, but she didn't. She remained slightly imperfect, slightly uncertain, exactly as practiced. Adrien stopped in front of her again. "You're performing?" he said. The words landed sharply. Virginia gave a faint, controlled smile. "I don't know what you mean." Silence stretched. Then Adrien gestured toward the building. "Come inside." Not an invitation, a decision. Virginia hesitated just long enough to feel natural, then nodded. "Okay." She followed him into the building. Inside was nothing like the outside world. White marble floors reflected soft daylight. Glass walls stretched upward endlessly. Everything was clean, controlled, and silent in a way that felt expensive. Order made visible. Adrien walked ahead without checking if she followed. He didn't need to. She was already being tracked by his attention. A private lounge opened at the top level, overlooking the entire city. Sunlight poured through the glass, turning everything into brightness and reflection. Adrien finally turned. Sit. Virginia lowered herself carefully into the chair, still maintaining the blind persona, slightly delayed, slightly uncertain. He sat across from her, watching, not blinking often. You're not blind, he said. No build-up, just impact. Virginia didn't react immediately. That pause mattered. When she spoke, her voice remained steady. I am. Adrien leaned forward slightly. If you were, he said, you wouldn't track movement when I stand still. Silence. Her fingers tightened slightly on the chair. He noticed. Of course he did. Adrien continued. You hesitate only when it benefits timing. You adjust only when watched. And your gaze follows sound too precisely. He leaned back. Blind people don't perform precision. The room felt brighter. Too bright. Virginia kept her posture controlled. Her mind worked fast, but her expression stayed calm. Adrien studied her again, then said, You're either lying or running from something worse than exposure. He stood and walked toward the window. The city stretched endlessly below them. Virginia stayed still, then finally spoke. I won't cause trouble. A controlled lie. Adrien glanced over his shoulder. I know. That answer landed heavier than suspicion, because it meant he wasn't reacting. He was analyzing, predicting. Adrien turned slightly. You can stay here tonight, he said. Virginia looked up. That's it. Yes. A pause. Then colder. Until I decide what you are. Containment. Not safety. Not rescue. Control. Virginia understood immediately. But leaving wasn't an option anymore. Not because she was trapped. Because she had already been seen. She stood slowly. I won't be a problem, she said. Adrien nodded once. I know. Again. Too calm. Too certain. He turned back to the city. Dismissal without trust. But not rejection. Virginia remained still for a moment, then followed the direction he indicated deeper into the space. As she moved, she felt it clearly. She had escaped one cage and stepped into another built by someone who missed nothing. Behind her, Adrien spoke quietly, almost to himself. I don't believe you. A pause. But I'm not letting you leave yet. The room stayed bright even after Adrien Voss left. Sunlight poured through the glass walls of the penthouse lounge, painting everything in clean gold reflections. The city stretched endlessly below, alive, distant, untouchable. But Virginia Scott no longer felt distance the same way. Not after him. Not after the way he had looked at her, like she was a puzzle already missing pieces. She stood still for a moment after he disappeared into another section of the penthouse. The silence wasn't empty. It was monitored, controlled. Like everything here was designed to observe without being obvious. Virginia adjusted her posture slowly, softened her shoulders, let her gaze drift slightly out of focus. The blind act was no longer a performance. It was armor. Footsteps returned. Adrien. He entered carrying a glass of water. He didn't offer it immediately. Instead, he placed it on the table between them and said casually, Drink. Virginia turned her head slightly toward the sound, then paused, just long enough to be noticed. She reached forward carefully, hand hovering in the air, not directly aligned, not precise. Her fingers brushed the edge of the glass, slightly off-center, a controlled imperfection. She picked it up and drank. Adrien watched without blinking. Good instinct, he said. No emotion in his voice. Just evaluation. Virginia lowered the glass slowly. Thank you. A pause. Then he moved. Without warning, Adrien walked across the room and stopped beside a sculpture positioned near the window. It was a sharp, modern structure, glass and metal intersecting at impossible angles. Come here, he said. Virginia hesitated. Just enough. Then stood. She walked forward carefully, adjusting her steps with slight uncertainty. Her hand extended subtly ahead, not fully reaching, just suggesting dependence on space she couldn't see. When she approached the sculpture, Adrien said nothing. He simply watched. Then quietly he shifted position, one step to the left. Virginia didn't react immediately, but her body adjusted. She corrected herself mid-step, slowing down just slightly, introducing hesitation where none was needed. Perfect recovery. She stopped beside the sculpture. Adrien studied her. "You adapt quickly," he said. Virginia tilted her head slightly. "I've had time to adjust." A simple answer. Safe. But Adrien stepped closer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. A coin. He dropped it. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, clean sound. It rolled. Virginia didn't move immediately. She listened, tracked the sound, calculated distance, then bent down slowly, hand extending in the correct direction, but not perfectly aligned. She picked it up after a brief delay and stood. Adrien didn't react, but something in his eyes shifted. He moved again, this time faster. He walked toward the opposite side of the room and stopped near the window, where light flooded in stronger. "Follow me," he said. Virginia followed. Controlled pace. Measured hesitation. But Adrien changed direction mid-step, unexpectedly. A deviation. Testing reaction. Virginia almost adjusted too quickly. Almost. She caught herself and slowed down deliberately, introducing uncertainty where precision had tried to appear. She stopped a few steps away from him. Correct distance. Correct uncertainty. Adrien turned slightly. "You don't hesitate like someone blind," he said again. Virginia gave a faint smile. "People adapt differently." "Not like that," he replied. The city outside continued glowing, unaware of the tension forming inside the glass walls. Adrien studied her face again. Longer this time, like he was searching for cracks instead of answers. Then he walked past her, stopped behind her. "Turn around," he said. Virginia complied slowly. Carefully. He was close again. Too close. Adrien lifted his hand, not touching her, but near her shoulder, then dropped it slightly to the side, making a small sound against the table behind her. A pen. It fell. Virginia didn't react immediately. Not because she didn't hear it, but because reacting too quickly would break the illusion. She waited, then turned slightly toward the sound and lowered her hand in that direction. Correctly delayed. She picked it up. Adrien stepped back. Silence stretched again. Then he said, almost quietly, "Most people don't recover that cleanly." Virginia stood still. "I try not to make mistakes," she said. That earned a faint pause from him. Adrien walked toward the center of the room again. "This isn't curiosity anymore," he said. Virginia didn't respond. He turned slightly. "This is pattern recognition." Virginia felt it immediately, because patterns could be studied and broken. Adrien continued, "You adjust too precisely when tested. You anticipate movement too fast for someone relying on sound alone. And your hesitation is too controlled." He stopped, which means either you train for this, a pause, or you're lying about what you are. Virginia's expression stayed calm, but internally something tightened, because this wasn't random suspicion anymore. It was structure, logic. Adrien wasn't guessing. He was building a case. He walked back toward her, stopped just out of reach. "And I don't like unanswered equations in my space," he said. Virginia held still, a dangerous balance forming between them. Control versus deception. Observation versus adaptation. Then Adrien did something unexpected. He smiled faintly. Not warm, not kind, curious. "You're good," he said. A pause. "Better than most who try to lie their way into rooms like this." Virginia didn't respond, because that wasn't reassurance. It was acknowledgement of skill and escalation. Adrien turned away slightly. "Stay here," he said. "Don't leave the floor." Not request. Boundary. He walked toward the exit of the room, but before leaving completely, he stopped. Without turning back, he added, "I want to see how long you can keep this up." Then he was gone. The room returned to silence, but it no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Virginia slowly exhaled. Her posture remained intact, her expression controlled, but her mind was moving faster now than before, because Adrien Voss wasn't reacting like everyone else. He was testing her like a system under pressure, and systems eventually broke. She adjusted her stance slightly, refined the blind posture again. Softer gaze, slower breath, controlled uncertainty. But something had changed. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was engagement. And somewhere deep inside, She understood clearly. She fooled everyone else, but she wasn't sure she could fool him. He didn't expect. The penthouse felt different after Adrien Voss left. Not quieter, more measured, like the entire space had been adjusted to observe instead of live. Virginia Scott stood near the glass wall, overlooking the city, her reflection layered over thousands of distant lights below. The skyline shimmered in clean gold and silver tones, sharp and controlled like everything in his world. But she wasn't looking at the view. She was thinking about him, about patterns, about how he tested without warning, and how he never repeated himself twice. That meant something important. He wasn't just suspicious. He was adaptive. Virginia exhaled slowly and adjusted her posture, softening her shoulders, lowering her gaze into that unfocused state she had trained into herself. The blind identity wasn't something she switched on anymore. It was something she wore continuously. A second skin. Footsteps returned. She didn't turn immediately. She waited, then tilted her head slightly toward the sound. Adrien entered again, but this time, he wasn't carrying anything. He simply observed her from the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. Virginia sensed it. Not seen. Sensed. "You're still here," he said. A simple statement. Virginia turned slightly toward his voice. "You told me to stay." A pause. Then he stepped inside. This time, he didn't test immediately. He watched her move toward the seating area instead. Controlled steps. Slight hesitation before contact with furniture. Careful positioning. Everything consistent. But Adrien didn't speak right away. Instead, he sat across from her. Silence stretched between them. Not comfortable. Not hostile. Measured. Then Virginia did something unexpected. She reached forward, not toward him, but toward the table where a small decorative vase sat. Her hand brushed it lightly. Then she corrected its angle. Barely noticeable. Adrien's eyes narrowed slightly. "That was out of place?" he asked. Virginia nodded faintly. "It sounded unstable when I passed earlier." Another pause. That wasn't part of the test. It wasn't required. It wasn't strategic. It was observation. Adrien studied her longer this time. Virginia continued, calm but deliberate. When something is slightly off balance, it makes the space harder to navigate, even for someone who can see. Silence deepened. Then she added softly, "I prefer things stable." That sentence shifted something. Not dramatically, but enough. Adrien leaned back slightly. For the first time, he wasn't leading the interaction. He was receiving it. Virginia noticed immediately. She adjusted her posture, not to appear weaker, but steadier. Less defensive, more grounded. Then she asked something she hadn't planned. "Do you always test people this way?" Adrien didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was rare for him. Finally, he said, "Only the ones who don't belong." A subtle edge. But Virginia didn't retreat from it. Instead, she nodded slightly. "I understand that." Another pause. Then she added, "But not everyone who doesn't belong is dangerous." That landed differently. Adrien's gaze sharpened slightly. Virginia continued, carefully now. "Sometimes people just end up in places they were never prepared for." Silence again. The city outside glowed brighter as sunlight shifted. Adrien stood slowly and walked toward the window. But this time, he didn't turn his back fully. He kept her in partial view. "You speak like someone used to control," he said. Virginia tilted her head slightly. "I speak like someone used to surviving." That answer held weight. Not emotional, not exaggerated, just truth shape enough to feel real. Adrien turned slightly toward her now. "You don't react like the others I've brought here," he said. Virginia paused. "Others." A fraction of silence. Then he corrected himself lightly. "People I've observed." But the slip mattered. Virginia noticed. So did he. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then Virginia did something that broke pattern expectation entirely. She stood, not abruptly, not nervously, calmly, then walked toward the window where he stood. Slow, controlled. Adrien didn't stop her. He watched. She stopped a few feet away, not invading his space, but not avoiding it either. Then she spoke. "You think I'm pretending," she said softly. "But you're not asking the right question." His eyes narrowed slightly. "And what question should I be asking?" Virginia didn't hesitate. that I might be something you didn't account for. The air shifted, not dramatically, but precisely. Adrien studied her face again. Longer, uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time, he smiled faintly. Not warmth, not approval. Interest. You're different, he said quietly. Virginia didn't respond. Because that wasn't a compliment. It was recalibration. Adrien turned away slightly, but not fully disengaging. You don't behave like anyone I've observed before, he added. Virginia's voice softened. Maybe you've been observing the wrong type of people. That landed, not as defiance, but as implication. Adrien exhaled slowly. And for the first time since she had met him, his attention wasn't analytical alone. It was focused, sustained, personal. He moved past her again, but slower this time. Not testing, watching. Most people react predictably under pressure, he said. You don't. Virginia turned slightly toward him. I've had practice being under pressure, she replied. That statement didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded lived. Adrien stopped near the center of the room, then turned fully to face her. A longer silence followed, the kind that didn't test deception. It tested presence. Finally, he said quietly, for the first time in years, a pause. Something about you doesn't make sense. Virginia held still, not reacting, not breaking character. But inside, she understood the shift clearly. She hadn't just survived his tests anymore. She had disrupted them. And that meant one thing. She was no longer just being watched. She was becoming studied. Adrien Voss wasn't suspicious anymore. He was intrigued. And intrigue in a man like him was far more dangerous. What do you think is going to happen next? Type it in the comments section. Like, share, and subscribe. The penthouse was quieter than usual. Not empty, just restrained. Like even the air had learned how to behave around Adrien Voss. Virginia Scott stood near the long glass window again, but this time she wasn't focusing on maintaining the illusion. She was listening. The subtle shifts in the room, the absence of movement behind her. Adrien had been in and out of silence all afternoon, speaking less, watching more. But something about him had changed since their last exchange. Less testing, more distance, or maybe something heavier. Virginia adjusted her posture slightly, keeping her blind identity intact. Soft gaze, relaxed shoulders, controlled breathing. But her attention wasn't on performance anymore. It was on him. Footsteps finally broke the silence. Slower than usual, Adrien entered without his usual precision of movement. He stopped near the center of the room and didn't speak immediately. That alone was unusual. Virginia tilted her head slightly toward the sound. You're quieter today, she said gently. A pause. Then his voice came. I'm always quiet. But it wasn't true, and they both knew it. He moved toward the window, stopping beside her, but not looking directly at her at first. Instead, he looked outward toward the city that stretched endlessly under sunlight. Virginia didn't turn fully toward him. She waited. That was what people did when they were unsure, when they couldn't see the full picture. Seconds passed. Then Adrien spoke again, quieter this time. Do you ever get used to being somewhere you don't belong? The question wasn't directed like a test. It sounded unguarded. Virginia didn't answer immediately. Not because she didn't understand. Because she did. Too well. I think, she said carefully, you don't get used to it. You just learn how to survive it. Silence followed. Adrien exhaled slowly and turned away from the window, walking a few steps deeper into the room. Virginia sensed the shift. Not seen. Felt. Something had loosened. Not his control, but his resistance. She turned slightly toward him. You seem distracted, she added. A pause. Then he responded, I'm not distracted. But the way he said it lacked certainty. Virginia took a small step forward, not closing distance, but reducing emotional space. Carefully calibrated. Everyone gets distracted, she said softly. Even people who think they don't. Adrien looked at her then. Really looked. And for the first time, it wasn't analytical. It was something heavier. Tired. Behind his expression, something flickered briefly, gone almost instantly, but Virginia caught it. Not visually. Through tone. Through silence. Through absence of his usual precision. You're different from what I expected, he said again. But this time, it wasn't suspicion. It was confession disguised as observation. Virginia didn't press. Instead, she did something she hadn't done before. She softened her voice further. Expectation is dangerous, she said. It makes you miss what's actually in front of you. A pause. Then Adrien moved closer. Not aggressively. Not testing. Just closer. He stopped near the seating area, then lowered himself onto the edge of the couch like someone carrying weight they didn't want to acknowledge. Virginia remained standing, still blind in posture, but fully aware in presence. The silence stretched again, and this time, Adrien didn't break it immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. I don't usually let people stay this long in my space. That sentence carried more meaning than it should have. Virginia tilted her head slightly. Then why am I still here? She asked. Adrien didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked away, toward nothing specific. Then finally, because you don't react like the others. A pause. And I can't figure out why. That was it. The truth. Raw. Unfiltered. Virginia felt the shift immediately. Not in him, but between them. Something had moved from observation into proximity, from suspicion into exposure. She stepped carefully closer now, not invading but present. I'm not trying to confuse you, she said. Adrien gave a faint, almost humorless breath. That's the problem, he replied. You're not trying anything. And still, he stopped himself. Like the rest of the sentence wasn't meant to be spoken. Virginia sensed it. A vulnerability he hadn't intended to reveal. A crack. Small, but real. For the first time, Adrien looked away from her fully. Not because he was uninterested, because he was affected. You don't understand what it's like, he said quietly, almost to himself. Virginia didn't respond immediately. Then softly, then tell me. That simple sentence shifted everything again. Adrien turned slightly back toward her, but his guard wasn't fully restored. Not yet. There was a long silence. Then he said, people usually want something from me. A pause. They always take. Always calculate. His voice tightened slightly. But you? He stopped again. Virginia didn't move. Didn't interrupt. And that silence gave him space. I can't read you, he finally admitted. That was the closest thing to honesty he had given so far. Virginia's expression stayed composed, but her awareness sharpened. Because this wasn't part of his pattern. This was deviation. Human deviation. She took another step closer. Not too close. Just enough to be heard without strain. Maybe you're looking too hard, she said softly. A pause. Adrien didn't respond immediately. Then he leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose as if trying to reset himself. But it didn't work, because his eyes kept returning to her, even when he tried not to, even when he should have stopped. He stood abruptly, not aggressive, but unsettled. I need to focus, he said, but it sounded like he was convincing himself more than her. Virginia nodded slightly. I understand. He walked toward the exit of the room, paused, then without turning fully, stay here, a beat, then added more quietly, don't move, and then he was gone. The room fell back into silence, but it wasn't the same silence anymore. It had changed shape. Virginia remained still for several seconds, then slowly adjusted her posture again. But something inside her had shifted too, because Adrien Voss didn't just observe her anymore. He reacted to her, and that made him unpredictable. In the hallway outside, Adrien stopped walking. He exhaled slowly. His hand tightened briefly at his side before relaxing again. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't return to work. He just stood there, still, thinking, and told himself it meant nothing. But he couldn't stay away. The penthouse had a different energy now, not calmer, tighter, like the space itself had started reacting to what Virginia Scott was hiding. She stood near the edge of the living area, maintaining her blind posture, soft gaze, slightly delayed movements, hands resting lightly at her sides. But inside, she was fully alert, because Adrien Voss had left instructions. Don't move. But instructions were never protection. They were containment. And containment always attracted pressure from the outside. The elevator chimed. Once. Then again. Virginia didn't turn immediately. She listened. 2 sets of footsteps entered the penthouse. One familiar. One not. The familiar one was Adrien's assistant. Quick, controlled, professional. The second carried hesitation. Curiosity. Virginia adjusted her breathing slowly. The assistant spoke first. "She's still here." A pause. Adrien's voice followed from further inside the space. "Yes." Simple. Unbothered. But the assistant didn't leave. Instead, footsteps moved closer. Virginia felt it immediately, the shift in focus. The kind that wasn't casual observation anymore. It was inspection. "Sir," the assistant said, lower now, "you didn't run a full clearance on her background yet." Silence. Then Adrien, "I will." That should have ended it. It didn't. The assistant stepped further into the room. Closer to Virginia. "I've seen people like her before," he added. "They use conditions. Blindness. Memory gaps. Anything that lowers scrutiny." Virginia's fingers tightened slightly. Not visible. Controlled. But real. The assistant continued. "There are inconsistencies in her behavior. If she's not verified." "Enough." Adrien's voice cut through. Not loud, but final. The assistant stopped. A beat of silence followed. Virginia stayed still, head slightly angled, as if unaware of the exchange. But every detail was being recorded internally. The assistant wasn't done. "She could be connected to the Cole arrangement," he said carefully. "That family has been flagged before for internal fraud attempts." A shift in air. That name. Virginia felt it hit the room like pressure. But she didn't react. Not outwardly. Inside, everything tightened. Adrien stepped forward now. "You're making assumptions," he said. "No, sir. I'm following patterns." Another pause. Then footsteps again. Closer. The assistant moved toward Virginia. "Ma'am," he said, voice now directed at her. "Can you confirm how you lost your sight?" Virginia's heart slowed. Not panic. Calculation. This was the moment she had trained for. But not this specific version. Still, she adapted. She tilted her head slightly, as if orienting toward his voice. "I told Mr. Voss already," she said gently. "It was an accident." "Convenient," the assistant replied. The room shifted again. Danger tightening. Virginia felt it. If he pushed further, if he asked one more specific question, the structure she built would fracture. Silence stretched. Too long. Then the assistant stepped closer. "Were you treated?" he asked. A direct probe. Virginia opened her mouth, but didn't speak, because another sound interrupted. Adrien moved. Fast. Not aggressive, but immediate. He stepped between them. "Stop," he said. The assistant froze. The air changed again. Now it wasn't investigation. It was authority. Adrien's presence filled the space completely, cutting off proximity like a barrier. "She's under my observation," Adrien said. "Not yours." A pause. The assistant hesitated. "That's unusual," he replied carefully. "I don't care." Cold. Final. Virginia stood still, but internally, something shifted. Adrien hadn't asked her to speak again. He hadn't verified. He hadn't even looked for confirmation. He had chosen position over certainty. The assistant lowered his gaze slightly. "Yes, sir." But the tension didn't disappear. It only redirected. As the assistant stepped back, his eyes lingered on Virginia one last time. Not convinced. Not satisfied. Then he left. The elevator doors closed. Silence returned. But it wasn't safe silence. It was delayed consequence. Virginia exhaled slowly, maintaining her posture. Adrien remained in front of her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You didn't answer quickly enough." A pause. Virginia tilted her head slightly. "I didn't want to sound uncertain." That wasn't the problem. Silence stretched again. Adrien studied her. Longer now. Not testing. Re-evaluating. Then he said something lower. "If I hadn't stepped in, he would have kept pushing." Virginia nodded faintly. "He was suspicious." "He was digging," Adrien corrected. A pause. Then unexpectedly, "And I don't like people digging into things I haven't decided are a problem yet." That line landed differently. Not protection. Not trust. Control framed as choice. Virginia sensed it immediately. Adrien wasn't defending her identity. He was defending his authority over her situation. Still, he had intervened. That mattered. A silence followed. Then Adrien turned slightly toward the window again. But this time, He didn't walk away fully. He stayed close. Too close. You handled yourself well, he said. Not praise. Observation. Virginia gave a faint nod. I try not to draw attention. A slight pause. Then Adrien looked at her again. You already have my attention. The words weren't soft. They weren't emotional. But they carried weight. Virginia didn't respond. Because responding would mean acknowledging something neither of them had defined yet. Instead, she simply remained still. Composed. Controlled. But inside, she registered something dangerous forming. Not just suspicion anymore. Dependency. On his side. And instability. On hers. Adrien finally stepped back slightly. But his eyes didn't leave her. Not fully. I'll handle the rest, he said. Then paused. A fraction longer than usual. And don't leave this room without permission. He turned and walked toward the hallway. But stopped just before disappearing. Not looking back. He added quietly, for now. Then he was gone. Virginia remained standing in the center of the room. The sunlight shifted across the floor in slow gold lines, untouched by the tension that had just passed through it. She lowered her gaze slightly again. Blind, controlled, safe appearance restored. But something had changed. Someone else had noticed her too closely. And Adrien Voss had chosen her side without evidence, which meant the danger wasn't gone. It had only been postponed. And somewhere deep inside that silence, Virginia understood the truth clearly. If he ever found out the truth, everything would fall apart. The penthouse was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, predictive quiet. The kind that made every sound feel like it had meaning before it even happened. Virginia Scott stood near the glass wall again, maintaining her blind posture with practiced precision. Soft gaze, slight delay in movement, hands relaxed but controlled. But inside, she was no longer calm, because the system around her had changed. Adrien Voss had shifted from suspicion into protection, and protection was just another form of pressure. A new sound broke the silence. The elevator. Virginia didn't react immediately. She listened. One floor stop, then another, then a forced override. Unauthorized access. Her fingers tightened slightly at her side, but her expression remained unchanged. Footsteps entered the penthouse. Not Adrien's. Not his assistant's. These were different. Familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. 3 voices. 1 male. 2 controlled. And then, Virginia. Her name. Not spoken like concern. Spoken like ownership. She didn't turn immediately. She couldn't afford recognition patterns. Instead, she tilted her head slightly toward the sound, maintaining the blind illusion. Who's there? She asked softly. A pause. Then a man stepped forward. You've been very difficult to locate, he said. Her past. The arranged groom's representative. A legal shadow from the marriage contract she had escaped. Virginia's pulse tightened, but her voice stayed steady. I think you have the wrong person. A short, sharp laugh. No, he said. We don't. Footsteps moved closer. Virginia sensed proximity narrowing. Danger compressing space. Then another voice joined. Remove the act. This one colder. More certain. A woman. One of the family representatives. Virginia didn't move. But internally, she recalculated instantly. They had tracked her here. To Adrien Voss's territory. That meant something had leaked. Or worse, been observed. The man continued. You ran from your obligations. From the agreement. From us. A pause. And now you're here, pretending to be something you're not. Silence stretched. Too heavy. Virginia kept her posture steady. But her mind was moving fast. If they pushed too hard, Adrien would hear. And if Adrien heard, everything collapsed. The woman stepped closer. Open your eyes, she ordered sharply. That sentence hit differently. Not because of fear. Because of timing. Virginia could feel it now. The proximity. The angle. If she reacted too quickly, she would confirm suspicion. If she delayed too long, they would escalate. Then the man spoke again. We already know you're not blind. A pause. We saw the hospital records. The air tightened. Virginia's control didn't break. But something inside her sharpened. Hospital records didn't exist. Not the real ones. She had ensured that. Which meant someone had fabricated a trail. Deliberately. Her breathing slowed. The woman stepped closer again. You've been hiding behind a condition that doesn't exist, she said. Do you know what that is? A beat. Fraud. The word landed heavy. Not because it was true, but because it was loud enough to echo. Virginia shifted slightly, maintaining her blind posture, but subtly adjusting her stance for stability. She needed time. Seconds. Not more. The man added, we can expose you in minutes. A pause. Unless you come back willingly. Silence. Then, a new sound. Footsteps from the hallway. Slower. Controlled. Familiar. Adrien. Virginia didn't turn. But everything inside her tightened. The timing was wrong. Dangerously wrong. Adrien entered the space and stopped immediately. He sensed it. The shift in atmosphere. 3 outsiders. 1 Virginia. His gaze moved across the room slowly, then landed on the group. What is this? He asked. Not loud, but final. The man turned slightly. Mr. Voss, he said carefully. This doesn't concern you. Adrien didn't respond immediately. He walked closer and stopped beside Virginia, not touching her, but positioning himself in a way that altered the room's geometry. Control returned. Instantly. This is my space, Adrien said. Everything in it concerns me. A pause. The woman frowned. Then you should know what you're protecting, she said. Adrien's eyes narrowed slightly. Virginia felt it. The shift. Attention recalibrating. The man stepped forward. She is not what she claims, he said. Virginia Scott is not blind. She never was. Silence. The words hung. Too clean. Too direct. Virginia's heartbeat slowed. Not in fear. In precision. This was it. The breaking point. Adrien turned slightly toward her. Not fully. Not accusing. But watching. The woman added quickly. She deceived her entire family, escaped a legal contract, and manipulated identity conditions to avoid marriage obligations. A pause. And now she's here. Silence stretched again. Virginia didn't move. She couldn't. Not yet. Adrien remained still. But something in his expression shifted. Not belief. Not denial. Processing. Virginia sensed it immediately. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about confirmation seeking. The man stepped closer again. She's lying to you too. That line changed everything. Because it made Adrien the target. Not just observer, but participant. And that meant reaction. Adrien finally spoke. Low. Controlled. Leave. A pause. The man hesitated. Sir. I said leave. Final. The authority in his voice cut the room in half. The group froze, then slowly backed away. Not satisfied, but forced. The elevator doors opened again. They left. Silence returned. But it was not the same silence anymore. It was fractured. Virginia remained still. Blind posture intact. But everything inside her was now unstable. Adrien didn't speak immediately. He stood beside her, then slightly in front, blocking sight lines. Not protection. Positioning. Finally, he said quietly, that wasn't part of your story. Virginia didn't respond, because anything she said now would collapse either version of her. Adrien turned his head slightly toward her, and for the first time, his voice carried something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. I need you to tell me the truth. A pause. The room tightened again. Virginia didn't answer. Not yet, because in that silence, Adrien Voss was no longer observing her. He was about to find out who she really was. The penthouse didn't feel like glass and luxury anymore. It felt like a sealed chamber. Still, waiting, Virginia Scott stood exactly where she had been left, blind posture intact, hands calm at her sides. But inside, nothing about her was controlled anymore. Because Adrien Voss was watching her differently now. Not as a puzzle, not as a curiosity, as a question that finally demanded an answer. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then Adrien spoke. Tell me the truth. No anger, no accusation, just pressure. Virginia exhaled slowly. This was the moment she had avoided since the day she built the identity. Every lie she had layered, every hesitation she had rehearsed, every calculated imperfection, all of it now stood in front of her, stripped of safety. She slowly lifted her head, not fully breaking the blind posture, but no longer hiding behind it. A controlled pause. Then she spoke. I was never blind. The words landed cleanly. No hesitation. No softness. Just truth. The room didn't react immediately. Adrien didn't move. Didn't interrupt. That silence was worse than shock. Virginia continued, her voice steady but quieter now. I needed to disappear. And the only way I could do that was to become something no one would question. A beat. I studied it. I learned it. I lived it. Her fingers tightened slightly, but her posture stayed composed. I didn't fake blindness to hurt anyone. A pause. I did it to survive. The city outside shimmered through the glass like nothing inside the room was real anymore. Adrien finally moved. Slowly. Not toward her, but away. He turned toward the window, hands behind his back, breathing measured but heavier than before. For a long moment, he said nothing. Virginia didn't follow him. She didn't chase the reaction. She waited, because now there was nothing left to control. Only consequence. Adrien spoke finally. When I asked you questions, he stopped, then corrected himself. When I tested you, a pause. You never slipped in the ways I expected. He turned slightly, not fully facing her yet. That wasn't adaptation. Another pause. That was design. Virginia didn't respond. Because he was right. Adrien stepped closer again, this time slower. He stopped a few feet away. His voice lowered. You didn't just lie to people around you. A beat. You build an entire version of yourself to be believed. Virginia's breath tightened slightly. Not fear, exposure. Adrien continued. Do you understand what that means? Silence. Then he answered his own question. It means nothing you did was random. A pause. And everything I thought I understood about you was controlled. That should have been anger, but it wasn't. It was something more unstable. Adrien exhaled slowly, then looked at her fully for the first time since the reveal. No testing now, no analysis, just seeing her. Virginia finally lowered her blind posture completely. No performance left to maintain, just truth standing in the open. Adrien's voice softened slightly, but it carried weight. You should have left when you had the chance. Virginia met his gaze now, steady. I didn't know where to go. A pause. Then she added quietly, I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. Silence again. But this one felt different. Not empty. Present. Adrien looked away briefly, as if processing something he hadn't prepared for. Then he stepped closer. Not aggressively. Not cautiously. Just closer. You understand what happens now? He asked. Virginia nodded faintly. Yes. A pause. I'm exposed. Adrien didn't correct her. Instead, he said something unexpected. No. A beat. You're seen. The difference landed heavily between them. Virginia didn't respond, because she understood what he meant. Exposure was danger, but being seen was irreversible. Adrien's expression tightened slightly, conflict visible now. I should hand this over, he said quietly. A pause. But I won't. Virginia's breath slowed. That was not logic. That was choice. Adrien turned toward the window again, as if grounding himself in distance. Then, softer, because the moment I let them take you out of here. He stopped, then continued quieter. I lose control of something I still don't understand. Virginia didn't move, but something inside her shifted, because this wasn't protection out of duty. It wasn't calculation. It was attachment forming under resistance. Adrien turned back toward her. His voice lowered. I don't know what you are to me yet. A pause. But I know what happens when you leave. Silence stretched. Heavy. Unfinished. Then he added, and I don't intend to find out. Virginia held his gaze. No blind mask now. No deception left between them. Only truth. And something unspoken growing in its place. Adrien stepped back slightly, regaining control of himself. But not of the situation anymore, because that had already shifted. You stay here, he said finally. Not order. Decision. Virginia nodded slowly, but neither of them relaxed, because nothing about this was resolved. It was only exposed. Adrien turned toward the exit of the room, paused, then said quietly without looking back, I should hate what you did. A beat. But I don't. And then he left. Virginia stood alone in the bright penthouse, the city glowing endlessly beyond the glass like a world that no longer matched her reality. She had survived exposure, but not consequence. Because now Adrien Voss wasn't observing her. He was bound to her in a way neither of them understood yet. And somewhere deep in that silence, his obsession had already begun to take root. This is only the beginning. The truth is out, but the consequences are just starting. If you want part 2, comment continue, and I'll take this story into an even deeper level of obsession, danger, and emotional collapse between Virginia and Adrien. Because now, there's no going back. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.